So today we're going to cover one problem that resides in the space of problems that are far too common, that are really serious, they really bother people, they cause tremendous amounts of suffering, and yet they persist, not because there isn't a solution, but because society does not allow us to talk about the solution. And we're going to slaughter this taboo and just attack it head on. The topic is female infertility. It is an increasing problem today for reasons that will be very obvious once we're through this presentation. And in most cases, it is completely avoidable. Now, that doesn't mean that it's fixable for those who are suffering from it. But in some cases, it is. In most cases, though, it can be prevented. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the main causes. There are two of them. One is being overweight, and the other is being old. Now, obviously, you can't reverse your age, but you can lose weight. And whether this applies to you or it's something that you can share with others, the point is there's an immense amount of suffering that's preventable here. But we have to be willing to talk about the taboo. And this is a pattern that's extractable to so many other facets of life. So often, avoidable suffering happens because people are not willing to look at or consider or change something that causes short-term pain. They're preferring long-term pain of a much greater quantity over short-term pain to solve the problem. This is a problem with human nature. We prefer to feel good right now rather than to feel good long-term. And what happens is we set a hard limit on how much we're willing to suffer right now. And the space of our experiences tends to be filled with completely preventable suffering. And the problem is that you don't care about your future self enough to go through the short-term suffering that will alleviate that problem. So let's get into it. First question, are you fat? This is not something that modern people in the first world like to talk about. There are many places around the world where it's not taboo to talk about being overweight or underweight. I spent 2 years in Chile, and in that culture, husbands and wives will call each other skinny or fat as a term of endearment. They don't pretend that things are different than they are. And there are significant negative consequences to this hard limit on what we're willing to recognize from reality. And it's a form of lying to refuse to acknowledge the obvious. The elephant in the room in this case, quite literally. So this has an impact on fertility, and we're going to talk about two main points from this. One is that it has the impact, and just how soon it starts having an impact. And then also what might come to as a shock to you in terms of physically what it looks like once you're overweight enough to reduce your fertility as a woman. So here's a graph. I'm sorry I don't have the source for this, and it's a very old one, and we'll get into why later, okay? But look, here we've got body fat percentage on the x-axis, and then the odds ratio for infertility. And this has to do with disruption of either the incidence of or quality of ovulation. So we see that the ideal is somewhere around 21%. Now, already, I know that your eyes have gravitated to these pictures of ladies on the right. Let's talk about this. I obviously did not make this. But there's a lot that could be said about this, so we'll try to pare this down a bit. What I want you to realize is that in the modern world, in the first world, as a society, we have given license to female obesity. And what we've done is we've shifted the standard of acceptability to a much higher body fat percentage than it was even 10 years ago. You can look up a movie from 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and you'll be shocked to see that you'll actually notice how skinny everyone is compared to now. It's jarring. If you want to go even further back in time, you can look up pictures from the beach in the early 90s or something, and you'll just be absolutely shocked. So not to dwell on that infinitely, but look, what does 21% look like on a woman? Top right. By modern standards, this is like an extremely fit woman, right? This is someone you'd expect this person at the gym and they're running, 1 million miles a day or whatever. That's mentally where we go to with this. No, this is somewhere between these two is the ideal female body type as far as fertility goes. Which is amazing, isn't it? So we have this idea in modern society that female infertility is widespread and it's something that's a very common problem. Yeah, guess what else is? Overweight females. Young, overweight females. It used to be, so it crept in from the older age down. But now it's very common. Even a girl getting out of high school is most likely to be overweight. And by the end of the freshman year of college, if she goes, but that sort of age, 20 years old, 19 years old, she's probably overweight. And it just gets worse from there. Now let's look at a range, okay? This is where the odds ratio comes into play. It's 2 times worse. Infertility is 2 times worse if you get super thin, 17.5. So when you start looking like this, you're reducing your odds of pregnancy. And in the modern world, that's really not a problem. Doesn't happen very often, but we trace that over to here. You get to 30, maybe 29. Look at this lady. No one would look at this and say, you know what? She has a higher chance of infertility because she's fat. I don't speak for all men, but I think most men would find women in this category extremely attractive as far as physical looks go, as far as body fat percentages. They might even call that ideal. But the point is once you get to this, and I think almost all people today would consider this a very normal woman. But she's all the way up here. She's 3 times more likely to have a fertility problem due to weight. Due to weight. Isn't that insane? This should shock you. This is very surprising. And then it gets worse from there. And so how often do women in these categories who are struggling to get pregnant or have a successful pregnancy to give birth, how often are they looking in the mirror and saying, oh, I'm probably just too fat? Now, the good news is if you're struggling with that, it's a completely fixable problem. Completely fixable. Depending on how far gone you are, intermittent fasting will probably do the trick. And you can Google that and look it up. I've made videos on fasting, but intermittent fasting is probably all you need. You can get there. You need to make long-term changes to how much you eat and maybe what you eat so that you can keep it off. But there's your solution. If you look like this or heavier, you should definitely lose some weight if you want to do everything you can to get pregnant. Okay? Now, as a footnote to this, in case you think that these are completely unrealistic ideals, here's another shocker. This is the corresponding picture of guys at that body fat percentage. And so if you think that this is unrealistic expectations, this is what it looks like to be a guy at the same body fat percentage. Okay? So all these people who say, people today have unrealistic body standards. A, no, look at pictures from the past. And B, no, yes, we do, but not for women. It's for guys. It's for guys. And I won't go into the details of what it takes to get a body like this versus what it takes to get a male body at 15% body fat or 10% body fat, which is unfortunately what people think of as quote unquote normal. But I digress. It's much easier to attain this than the male ideal. The female, in other words, the female ideal is just you wake up and you don't shove food in your mouth. That's, maybe you work out 3 times a week for 15 minutes. It's very attainable. You just have to not eat 4,000 calories a day. Okay? Now let's switch. The other thing, and unfortunately this one, the only thing you can do about this is to encourage young women to have children earlier than you did, or that you tried to. But why is this such a problem? It's a long story, and it's not exactly a conspiracy theory. It's just the convergence of many factors. But the point is that in that convergence, there's an awful lot of pressure to try to convince society that women can delay childbirth as long as they want to. You've got the quote-unquote fertility clinics who make massive amounts of money on desperate older ladies who are struggling to have children and freaking out about it, quite frankly. You've got the publication mills where the peer reviewers will not publish anything that speaks against the prevailing woke mentality, which is a woman can do everything. There's no harm in delaying motherhood. There's no cost to it. There's no loss. And et cetera, okay? So the research that's being done, the publications that come out, the things that make it into the media, they're all aimed at supporting this lie, which says that a woman can do it all and she can have children anytime she wants, and the child's outcomes will be the same and all this. And it's pretty dark if you start digging into where these things come from and who's behind it. Again, it's not like one person. This isn't some conspiracy theory, but there have been many people who have set out to intentionally push this narrative, and it's a lie. And so as you're looking for, when you're researching this, as you're looking for data, you have to be very careful, because everything from the title of research papers to the kinds of results that they highlight versus what's actually in the paper, especially in terms of the graphs that they make, the visuals, they will selectively hide information and present things in a way to distort the truth towards this end, okay? There's a huge bias. Let me give you some examples. There's a difference between a first birth for a mother and subsequent births. So it's well known that it's easier for a woman to have a subsequent baby, second, third, whatever, versus a first child. And so if you're looking at data on pregnancy outcomes, and they don't separate subsequent births from first births, and there's an age dimension to the data, well, that's absolutely skewed. Because what they're doing is they're trying to get people to conflate fertility rates, or whatever the outcome is, for first-time mothers with all mothers. Do you see how that would skew it? It would make it look better than it is. So here's an example. This graph is an example of that distortion. Now, what you will tend to see with these graphs, not always, but most of the time, is that it's still bad. It still looks terrible. They can only juice this up so much, okay? But here you have the maternal age starting at 20, going up to over 45, and spontaneous abortions go through the roof. They head towards 100 over 45. And the fertility rate drops like a rock from 20, especially at 35. But this does not separate out whether these are first-time mothers or not. Okay? And for the other thing, they do all kinds of things. It's not just first versus subsequent birth. They also mask the time ranges. So fertility, you have to ask, what do they mean by that? Every single time you have to ask, what do they mean by that? In this case, in the paper, it was within a year of trying. Well, there's a huge difference between trying for a month and trying for a year. In some cases, you'll see the time frames go to 2 or 3 years, or even beyond that. And that's insane because, again, a normal person looking at the graph is going to assume that it translates into their percentage chance of getting pregnant if they want to right now at their present age, or maybe years into the future. What's that going to look like? But that's not what it's showing. It's like if you want to make a full-time job out of trying to get pregnant, which your husband probably won't complain about, but it's probably not what you want as a woman for various reasons. But it's not giving you a realistic expectation of what to expect, right? Plus, if it's going to take you 4 years to get pregnant, well, all the more reason to start earlier, right? If you do that at 35, you're in big trouble, right? And it takes you 4 years to get pregnant, you're in big trouble. A lot of this data, they won't separate natural birth from interventions like IVF. It doesn't tell you if this 43-year-old is using frozen eggs. Because guess what? If you don't have frozen eggs, you don't pay all that money for the invasive procedure to get them, then that doesn't help you very much, does it? And there's also a very, very dark side to this, which is the amniotic fluid test that's a part of most pregnancies. It's just sort of a routine thing that people do. It will show if your baby has Down syndrome. And most of those pregnancies are aborted. This is a terrible thing, but it happens all the time. And so that's not going to show up in the data necessarily. And it's terrible. It gives people a completely incorrect view. Now, here's an outright lie that you'll see all over the place when you research this. Look at this graph to the right. Monthly fecundity rate, which is a fancy way of saying, if you try, how likely are you to get pregnant? And you see this completely straight line until about 33. There's absolutely no drop in fertility according to this graph before 33. And then, of course, like I said, it's still ugly. After that, it drops down like a rock in just a couple years, 5 years, boom, drop, right? Falls off a cliff after your early 30s. They still can't even hide that. You're going to see a version of this graph in a couple of different places. It's a complete lie. It's completely false. And you'll see it in peer-reviewed papers. It's not true. Here's something closer to the truth. It goes down every year. It goes down every year. And it still drops like a rock after 30. Okay? It goes down every year. Here's a nice summary graph. And these are from Wikipedia, which is nice because that has a strong bias towards the woke side of things. And still, this comes through. So I hope that makes it credible for people. I'm not just cherry picking things. Look at these topics, okay? These classes of condition. There are several points embedded in this very small graph. One is it doesn't happen to everybody at the same time. So you could say, oh, I've got, my cousin named Elizabeth. She was like 1 million years old and she still had a baby. Okay, one, it might have been a miracle. Two, if his name was John, it raises questions. But two, you can't argue the average from the example of an exception. What would he do if your cousin Elizabeth got pregnant at 1 million years old? The question is, are you going to get pregnant at 1,000,000 years old? The only rational way to estimate that is by looking at the average. And so it's important to understand that fertility problems can start as early as the early 20s. Now, it's rare. It's becoming less rare because women are getting fatter at an earlier age, but it can happen. And there are other causes, by the way. I'm not trying to say those are that weight is the only cause. Absolutely not. Or even that hormones are the only cause. But these are the two most likely causes. And then full-on sterility can happen in the mid-20s. It's totally possible. It's rare. Becomes a lot less rare once you hit 30. Okay? And it's not the subject of this conversation, but menopause is a thing. And it's something that no one talks about, and it can start really early. All right? And it does. So these are all things that matter. Now, one way in which this is related that no one talks about is, and it has to do with this. When people talk about age and pregnancy or age and marriage, because if you're a man and you want to have kids, this stuff matters. If you're dating Jabba the Hutt, you're probably not going to be able to have kids with her. Okay? That is a possibility, at least. And so these are things that you have to consider. But one of these considerations is how it goes after the baby is born. Let's say that you get pregnant successfully, the child is born healthy and well. Well, how's the mother? How's the mother? Because I'm telling you, if you're 38 and you have a baby, especially a first baby, it is going to wipe you out. You will never be, you have never been as tired as you're going to be for the next year. And guess what? If you're working, especially if you're working, but even if you're not, the odds that everything in your life is going to go to pieces because you don't have any energy to do anything but feed that baby and change his diapers, it's very high. And if you already have kids and you're having a subsequent child at a late age, the odds of this causing big problems, it just keeps increasing. Women are they're designed to have babies shortly after becoming women. Their whole metabolism and everything else is designed to spike at that time for all the energy they need to do that. It takes a lot of energy to create a human being inside of you and then to sustain that child outside of you. It takes a lot of energy. And once you hit 40, it's gone. And it starts to wane years before that. All right? And here's one of the reasons why. So a lot of times, venomous things are said about men for preferring younger looking women. But one thing that's not talked about very often is where those youthful looks come from. It's not their age. It's, to a great degree, the number of eggs that they still have. Which is a really weird thing to talk about, but it's a scientific fact. The kind of estrogen that makes you look young and gives you all these positive moods and all this energy and all this mental energy, all of those things decline in menopause significantly. 30% is the magic number. It's been measured on several things like brain activity. Drops by 30% on average with menopause. So, and it stays that way for the rest of your life. So all of those things, the eggs emit that type of estrogen. And it all comes from that. Just like if you take a guy and you remove his testosterone, he stops being a go-getter. He's probably not in a good mood. He just wants to sit around and sleep all the time. And they turn into old men. Well, When you take away a woman's eggs, she turns into an old lady. And guess when that happens? It's a constant thing. It's sand through an hourglass. Look at how constant this line is. All right? And it starts getting really low, not at 50 or 40. It starts getting really low. Look, it's at 20% at age 25. It's at 10% at age 30. And these are the eggs that are emitted in order to get pregnant. You get one per month, right? And so when there are fewer and fewer of them and their quality declines over time as well, guess what? It's harder to get pregnant. But also those outcomes, those post-birth outcomes. Life's going to be a lot harder with little kids if you're 40 than if you were 20. A lot harder. And any honest person has to admit that. All right, here's a nice graph that summarizes that it's not just about getting pregnant. It's also about what happens after you get pregnant. So there are all these barriers that increase with age in terms of trying to get pregnant. But then once you are pregnant, what happens is the odds of spontaneous abortion or miscarriage, they go up by a lot, and the odds of ectopic pregnancy go up, relatively speaking, by a lot with every single year. With every single year. Okay? So if you go strictly by the data, the best time to try to have a baby is probably somewhere around 20. And that befuddles the modern sacred cows. There are significant and substantial downsides to waiting until closer to 30. The sooner you start having babies, the better. As an adult woman. Okay? Now, if you want to maximize your odds of success with this, the advice is very simple. Stay fit and start early. That's it. And if you're not doing those things, and again, starting early, it's the greatest time to start is now if you're 18 or over. But the greatest time to start is when you become an adult. But the second greatest time to start is now. If this is important to you, you need to get on it. Okay? If age has become an issue, maybe you can still do something about your fitness levels. And maybe that will help, and maybe it won't be enough. But there is a basket of decisions that we make in life that cannot be done again. And that's just the way it is. You can't have everything. The decisions you make matter. And that's why it's so important to make these things known to other people, even if they hate you for it. Very few people will care enough to say these things, even though people hate hearing them. And so if you find value in that, if you're not doing so already, I encourage you to support this channel by making monthly donations. There's a module to set up monthly recurring donations at upwardthought.org/donate. And if you find these things valuable, I encourage you to help out because it matters. Matters a lot.